You ever have one of those mornings where you wake up to find your whole world's changed overnight? I mean, not in some poetic way, not like your kid's off to college or your dog finally caught that squirrel. No, I'm talking about stepping outside, coffee in hand, breathing in that lake air like you always do, and seeing your grandfather's dock, something he built with his own two hands, reduced to a pile of splinters floating out there on Clearwater Lake. That was me. That's how it started. My name's Thatcher Donovan, and this is the story of how a homeowners association tried to steal the legacy my family built from nothing, and how I refused to let them. They say the early light of September's softest on the water, and that morning it sure was mist rolling off the surface like a secret, like the world was still quiet and untouched. I stood there, toes curled on cedar boards, coffee warming my hands, and I'll tell you, I could feel my grandfather right there with me. These weren't just boards, not to us. They were history, sweat, stubbornness, and love hammered into every inch. There carved into the main beam was Donovan Landing Est, 1978, rebuilt 25. 3 generations, all of us learning from the last. And that dock was more than just a place to fish or tie up the old aluminum boat. It was a line in the sand. That morning I thought the ruckus I'd heard the night before was highway work. County'd been talking about widening the road a few miles out, and sound travel's funny over water. I finished my coffee and didn't think about it again until a week later, out paddling my old kayak. Usually I kept to the eastern shore closer to home, but that day I guess I was feeling restless. I headed for the southern point, rounded a little cove, and there they were. 8 cabins, half-built raw lumber and fresh concrete foundations, sticking out of the woods like they didn't belong. And these weren't hunting shacks. We're talking big luxury numbers. Electrical lines strung out, numbered lot placards, hammered into the dirt, a banner strung up between 2 posts that read, Ridgewood Meadows HOA Community Project. Lot 14, Lot 15, Lot 16, Lakeview Estates. Like some kind of amusement park, only it was my land. And that's the thing, my land. See, my grandfather bought the entire western shoreline in '77, back when nobody wanted land this far out, before the yuppies and the speculators and the lakefront visionaries came sniffing around. I grew up with those old hand-drawn maps, every tree line and ridge carefully marked. The deed said 12 acres, and I paid taxes on every damn inch since Carter was president. That western shore, it was Donovan property. Period. But when I pulled out my phone and started snapping pictures, documenting every unfinished cabin, every sign, every number, I couldn't find a single worker, not one soul to yell at, not even a generator running. Just silence, the kind that makes your stomach twist. I paddled home, pulled the lockbox from the back of the closet, and laid every scrap of paperwork out on the kitchen table, the old yellowed photocopy of the deed tax receipts, maps with shaky pen lines faded from decades in a drawer. And even as I did it, something cold settled in my gut, the kind of feeling you get when you realize the wolf's been circling your camp all along and you never saw it coming. So I called the county recorder's office. Got a clerk who sounded like she'd rather be anywhere else. She put me on hold twice, then told me pre-1985 deeds weren't digitized. Could take 6 to 8 weeks to check the archive, sir. I hung up, staring at my faded photocopy, thinking 6 weeks. In 6 weeks, they'd have finished every cabin, paved the driveway, maybe even cut down the old birch grove I played under as a boy. 3 days later, I woke to silence. Not the good kind. The kind that makes you sit up in bed before you even know why. Walked to the window. Dock was gone. Not broken gone. All that was left were the pilings sticking out like broken teeth. A couple planks floated near the shore. Fresh tire tracks cut through the mud right back to the main road, the one serving the HOA. I just stood there, couldn't move, couldn't think. I'd built that dock myself. 12 hours ago, it was solid. Now it was memory. I drove 3 miles through what used to be forest, now getting chewed up for cul-de-sacs and retention ponds, past signs screaming Phase 2 and Phase 3 Ridgewood Meadows. The HOA office was a modular trailer vinyl siding and a gravel lot smelling like carpet glue and fresh paint. The woman behind the desk, mid-50s, platinum hair, navy blazer, stiffer than a flagpole, looked up and gave me the smile people save for lost causes. Rella Patone, HOA president, her nameplate read. She let me finish telling her about the dock, then with hands folded on her desk said, "Your dock violated community safety codes. We had it removed for liability reasons. You ever feel your blood pressure climb so high you can hear it in your ears? That's private property," I told her. She didn't even flinch. Just reached into a drawer, rolled out a 2018 plat map, pointed to my shore-colored blue, and labeled HOA Common Area. According to county records, she said, tapping the map with her perfect nail, this shoreline is designated for community use. If you have documentation proving otherwise, you'll need to provide it. I told her I had the original deed. She gave me that same polite smile. Original deeds must be properly registered. If yours isn't in the county system, you may want to consult an attorney. I drove home in a fog, counted the cabins again, 14 now moving fast, made dinner, ate it cold, watching the sun set over the scarred land that used to be mine alone. That night I started Googling quiet title action Montana. Spent hours reading legal blogs, scribbling notes, feeling the anger burn away the numbness. I was going to let them finish. Every nail, every new foundation, another piece of evidence, another dollar they owed me. They thought they'd beaten me because I didn't wave paperwork in their faces. They didn't know me. You know what I mean? Sometimes the only way to win is to wait to let them walk right into their own trap. 20 years tracking animals in the woods teaches you patience. The best hunters. They don't announce themselves until it's too late. I started going to the county recorder's office in person just to see what needed to understand how a deed from 1978 could disappear. The place was a red brick building that smelled like old paper and cheap coffee. The clerk was a young woman, Sarah, tired eyes, patient smile. She echoed what I already knew, pre-1985 deeds aren't digitized. The archive building's under renovation. Could be 2 months before we can access the records. I asked if there was any way to move things along. She just shook her head. Sorry. Back home, I checked the lockbox again, hoping I'd missed something. Nope. Just the water-damaged photocopy blurred at the edges. The original was gone, lost, somewhere between the time my dad passed and me finally moving back after my divorce. That was the crack Relly was counting on. 2 days later, her letter showed up $500 a day for unauthorized use of community lakefront. That's when I knew it wasn't a misunderstanding, it was a plan. I started calling attorneys. Most wanted nothing to do with HOA fights, but finally found one Callahan who didn't hang up. He listened to ask the right questions, then he leaned in and said, "What about the original surveyor? If we can find the person who marked those boundaries, get them to testify." It was like someone opened a window. "Start with the County Historical Society," he told me. "They keep records the official archives don't." And just like that, I had hope. Maybe not a guarantee, but hope. I guess you could say things really escalated from there, like the moment Callahan mentioned tracking down the original surveyor. Something in my head just clicked. You spend your whole life trusting that what's written on paper, what your family paid for, fought for, can't just be erased by a slick smile and a new map, right? Well, you'd be surprised how fast folks start treating you like the crazy one once the rumor mill gets rolling. Because as soon as the HOA's lawyers got wind, I was looking for records, they started hitting back. First it was a letter, big legal letterhead, all caps threatening criminal charges if I didn't cease and desist all lake access. From a guy named Lawson Driscoll, 3 offices, none of which sounded like they did real law, more like professional bullying. He quoted their 2018 plat map like it was, "The 10 Commandments said, my claim was frivolous and subject to sanctions. I read it twice, filed it away, made a note of every threat, because that's the thing paper cuts both ways." By late October, the whole western shore was full of cabins, 22 if you can believe it. And the HOA, they held a ribbon-cutting local paper there, cameras flashing. Rochelle giving speeches on a brand new dock, bigger than anything my family ever built, boasting about responsible development and shared community values. Not a word about the dispute. Not a hint of the fact that none of this was theirs to build. Just glossy PR, look what we made for you. They made me out to be some kind of crank, hoarding a whole lake, standing in the way of progress. And that's when the online stuff started. Someone posted on the community forum that an elderly man thanks for that was blocking families from enjoying the public lake. Folks piled on selfish, entitled, "Why won't he share?" I didn't respond. Didn't see the point, but I screenshotted everything. Dated it, filed it, because if I've learned one thing, it's this: document everything. One comment I'll never forget. This guy thinks he owns the world because his family bought some land 50 years ago. Times change, old man. Learn to share. Yeah, well, times do change. So does the truth, depending on who's telling it. After that, I called the County Historical Society, a little office in Helena, 4 hours away. Woman on the line sounded older than the hills, voice crackling like radio static. I asked about survey records from the 70s. "Oh, we got those," she said. "Nothing digitized, though. You'll have to come see 'em yourself." I promised I'd be there the next week, then hung up and went outside. The lake was so still it felt fake, just the lights from those 22 cabins staring back at me like eyes in the dark. And I realized these people, they really thought they'd won. They had their cabins, their legal filings, their developer friends, their HOA newsletter. They'd turned the whole town against me, made me the villain in their story of progress, but every nail, every glowing window was standing on land they'd stolen, and I was going to prove it. The quarterly HOA meeting rolled around, November chill in the air. Community center packed 60, 70 people, most of them new arrivals. I sat in the back wearing my old flannel, the one with the tear in the pocket. Nobody looked at me. Nobody smiled. Michelle Rell opened the meeting from the front charcoal blazer, this time big slideshow. First slide, an aerial photo of the western shore, every cabin labeled occupancy status, revenue projections, property values up 18%. She talked about synergy, sustainable growth investment. People nodded, took notes, smiled at each other like they were in on a secret. Then the next slide, my face. Grainy, long lens, but no mistaking it, me standing on my own property looking out at the lake. Rel gestured at it. "We've encountered some resistance from an individual claiming ownership of the common shoreline. This person has been uncooperative. Baseless accusations." She let it hang, then promised, "Our legal position is sound. We will not allow one person to undermine what we've built together." And the room just hummed, people nodding, even clapping. When she opened the floor for comments, I raised my hand. She saw me called on everyone else first. They asked about barbecues, landscaping, parking. Finally, like it was a chore, she nodded my way. "Yes, the gentleman in the back." I stood, voice steady, and told them, "The Western Shore is not common property. It's Donovan land deed from 78 taxes paid for 46 years. All I wanted was for them to halt construction till the ownership could be sorted." Relly let me finish, smiled that lawyer's smile. "We have county-approved plat maps. If you have documentation, present it through proper channels." Somebody in the front row yelled, "You just want the whole lake to yourself." Another, "We paid good money for lakefront access." "You can't take it away." I started to respond, but she cut me off, said there were more important matters. Nobody looked at me again. They talked snow removal, dock expansion, budgets. Meeting adjourned. People hurried out, giving me a wide berth like I was contagious. One woman, as she passed, locked eyes with me, shook her head disgusted. That's how it went after that. The clerk at the store, who'd always joked with me, rang up my groceries in silence. The hardware guy who'd fixed my mower twice, suddenly too busy to help. The plumber wouldn't touch my frozen pipe, said he was booked, and we both knew he wasn't. One morning I found a note taped to my door, anonymous, leave while you still can. Nobody wants you here. I stopped going into town unless I had to. Started ordering what I needed online shipped to a box 3 towns over. And the fence, 6 feet of pressure-treated pine, went up along the property line, blocking the lake path I'd walked since I was a kid. Private property. No trespassing violators prosecuted signs every 20 feet. Now, if I wanted to reach the water, I had to hike 2 miles through the woods, bushwhacking like I was in some bad movie, getting scratched up boots muddy, all to get to what used to be mine by right. At night, I'd sit in the dark house my grandfather built, staring at old photos, him on the dock in '83, my dad with a trout in '97, 3 generations. And I was the one about to lose it all because I couldn't find a piece of paper. The weight of that, the shame, the anger felt like it might crush me. But the next morning I got up before dawn and made the drive to Helena, 4 hours through the mountain snow on the Peaks radio, talking about water rights and property fights. The Historical Society was in a converted firehouse, old stairs, faded linoleum, the air thick with mildew and ink. The archivist, a sharp old gal with glasses thick as Coke bottles, smiled when I told her what I needed. "Follow me, dear. Surveys are in the basement." We went down and she pulled a file box off a shelf, dusty, heavy, full of old maps rolled tight. She flipped through muttering dates until she found it: Clearwater Lake Survey, 1977. Hand-drawn in blue and black ink, every tree line, every foot measured. There at the bottom, Donovan property, 12 acres, including the western shore. Signed Fletcher Grayson, licensed surveyor, Montana. I stared at it. I swear something in my chest just unlocked. The archivist offered certified copies, however many I needed. I asked if Fletcher Grayson was still around. She thought so, living in a retirement home in Butte. Wrote down the name, handed it to me. I thanked her, paid for the copies, stepped out into the cold, feeling for the first time in months like I had a fighting chance. The retirement place was called Mountain View Estates. Funny, because the only view was the parking lot. I drove there on a December morning, cold enough to bite through your coat. Inside smelled like hospital food and Clorox. The receptionist barely looked up. I asked for Fletcher Grayson. She checked the log, made a call, then waved me to room 314. There he was, a thin man, white hair, hands trembling, but his eyes sharp as anything. 88, but you could tell he still had his wits. I told him who I was. He said my grandfather's name out loud. Nash Donovan remembered him, remembered the job. Nobody wanted that land back then, he said, shaking his head. Too far from town. Your grandfather saw something others didn't. He let me spread the survey out on his lap table, ran his finger along the old lines. 18 acres total. Nash bought 12. I remember every foot. I told him the whole story. The cabins, the HOA, the vanished deed. He listened, getting grimmer with every detail. When I finished, he shook his head. They filed a plat map without a surveyor's signature. That's fraud, plain and simple. You can't just redraw property lines. I asked if he'd testify. He didn't hesitate. Absolutely. 40 years in this work, and I won't let some real estate weasel make a joke of it. He gave me his number and as a bonus handed me a sleeve with his original field notes, yellowed but legible. Keep everything he said. Professional habit. Driving home, it felt like a weight had lifted. I met Callahan the next morning, his office, cramped files stacked everywhere. He went through the survey, the field notes, the inheritance paperwork. When he looked up, there was a glint in his eye I hadn't seen before. We can file a quiet title action. This is exactly what it's for. Uncertain ownership needs legal clarification. He explained the process. I'd have to prove my inheritance, the accuracy of the survey, that the HOA's plat was fraudulent, and that their cabins were trespass. Fletcher's testimony is gold, he said. Your tax records seal the deal. I think we can win. We spent 3 days pulling every scrap of evidence, tax receipts going back to '78, photographs, utility bills, inheritance documents. Callahan started discovery on the HOA. And that's when we found it, a smoking gun buried in their internal emails. Relly to her lawyer Donovan doesn't have the original deed. If we complete construction before he locates proper documentation, we can claim adverse possession. Callahan read it twice, then looked at me. This isn't just a mistake, it's knowing trespass. That changes everything. We kept digging. Their 2018 plat map had a signature Callahan checked, and sure enough, it was a civil engineer, not a licensed land surveyor. That's not legal in Montana. Engineers can't certify boundaries. They had to know that. In mid-December, we filed our quiet title action with the court along with an emergency motion for an injunction stop all construction until the case was resolved. 100 pages of exhibits. We subpoenaed HOA financials, building permits, county communications, the whole 9 yards. The hearing was set for January, 8 weeks out. I paid Callahan's retainer from the money I'd saved for retirement, then went home waiting. The HOA still hadn't caught on. Relly sent more threatening letters. They started cabins 23 and 24. Every photo I took was more evidence in my favor. On Christmas Eve, I sat by the fire, poured 2 whiskeys, one for me, one for my grandfather's photo. I looked out at the lights across the lake, 24 cabins now, each one a violation, and promised I'm going to get it back. Pop. Every inch. January came in like a hammer cold, brittle and sharp-edged. The morning of the preliminary hearing, I could barely get my truck door open for the frost, and my hands shook so bad I nearly spilled my coffee. You know that feeling heading into a courthouse, not knowing if you're about to lose everything or finally get a fair shake? That's a kind of nerves you can't train for, not even after a lifetime of rough winters and rougher luck. District Court was a big stone building with echoing hallways and marble floors so slick I almost went down in front of the metal detector. Judge Annette Fairchild's silver hair reputation for running a tight ship took the bench. Callahan and I sat at the plaintiff's table. Fletcher was in a wheelchair beside us, folders stacked high with his field notes and certifications. Across from us, the HOA's legal army, 3 suits from Bozeman plus their local muscle. And there was Relly back row, white-knuckled, her face pale but defiant. Callahan led with our story. He walked the judge through the 77 survey, Fletcher signature, every line and measurement, and then the tax records, 46 years running, not a year missed. Fletcher testified, voice stronger than I expected, explaining the standards, the checks, the way Montana required surveys to be registered, not just drawn. The HOA's lawyers tried to object, too old, too unreliable. The judge shut them down. A properly executed survey doesn't expire. If you have evidence this man's work is flawed, present it. They had nothing. Then the HOA tried their angle. Their lead attorney said their 2018 plat map superseded any prior survey had been approved through proper channels. Callahan asked for the surveyor's license. Some shuffling, some coughing, and then admitted on the record the plat was certified by a civil engineer, not a licensed land surveyor. Judge Fairchild looked right over her glasses. In Montana, land boundaries must be certified by licensed surveyors. Is that correct? The attorney squirmed. Yes, Your Honor. But the engineer had site planning experience. She cut him off. Technically correct is legally correct in this courtroom. She issued a preliminary injunction right there. All construction activity is to cease immediately on the disputed property until ownership is determined. The HOA is prohibited from interfering with Mr. Donovan's access to the lake. We'll reconvene for a full hearing in March. I don't know if I breathed for a whole minute after that. The courtroom emptied fast, but not before I saw Rel surrounded by HOA members, their voices hissing angry. Callahan caught up with me in the lot. That went better than I hoped, he said, clapping me on the back. But get ready. They're going to fight like hell at the main hearing. He was right. Within days, the HOA held an emergency meeting, blasted letters to residents claiming I was stealing community property through legal trickery. An online petition started Stop the Lakeland Grab, hundreds of signatures. A GoFundMe for their legal fund popped up. The local news ran a story-neutral language, but the interviews were all parents and retirees who said they'd poured their savings into Ridgewood Meadows and how their kids deserved the lakefront cabins. Relly's lawyer called Callahan with a settlement offer $500,000 if I'd drop the suit and sign away the Western Shore. I didn't even have to think about it. No, I said. It's not about the money, it's about what's right. Callahan didn't argue. Good, he said. Because we can win this outright. Those weeks until March stretched forever. I didn't go into town, didn't answer the phone unless it was Callahan. The lake went silent. No construction, no laughter, no engines. Just wind and ice and that haunted, unfinished feel. Callahan came up twice prepping for the hearing. We lined up evidence, built the witness list, made sure every duck was in a row. I agreed to a public hearing, let the whole world see how justice worked if it worked at all. The night before, I couldn't sleep. Walked down to where my dock had stood, stared at the cabin lights across the water, 25, now 2 finished before the injunction took hold. Each one a monument to arrogance. Each one a reminder, if you don't fight for what's yours, someone will take it and the world will call it progress. Courtroom was packed by 9 a.m., news cameras along the wall, folks standing 4 deep at the back, every seat taken. The HOA crew all wore matching blue shirts, community rights. Relay was in the front row, expression stony HOA board beside her. I sat in a gray suit, first one I'd bought in years, hands folded over the leather folder Callahan gave me, trying not to shake. Judge Fairchild started by making it clear, this case will be decided by law, not public opinion. She stared right at the HOA block. Callahan opened, methodical as a surgeon, projected the 77 survey, big and bold boundary lines, Fletcher's signature, presented tax receipts, inheritance records, chain of title from my grandfather to my father to me, called Fletcher, who rolled up to the witness box and raised his right hand. Fletcher talked about surveying in the 70s, chains, theodolites, all checked and double-checked. 40 years, he said, and I never cut a corner. Boundaries marked in 77 are the real boundaries. Anyone who says different is either ignorant or lying. The HOA attorney tried to trip him up, said memories fade, water levels change. Fletcher barely blinked. I have the documentation. And water levels don't move property lines. That's basic law. Callahan called me up. I told my story, inheritance, the years on the land, the morning I found the dock gone. I kept it factual. Didn't want to look like a hothead. He asked, did you ever give the HOA permission to build? No. Ever get compensated? No. What do you want from this court? I looked at Rel and said, I want my land back, all of it. The HOA lawyers tried to paint me as a hermit, a miser, a dinosaur, hoarding resources out of spite. Callahan shut it down, objected again and again, and the judge mostly agreed. Then he played our trump card, the email projected on the courtroom screen. Relly to her attorney. Donovan doesn't have the original deed. If we complete construction before he locates proper documentation, we can claim adverse possession. Silence fell like a hammer. Callahan read it out slow and careful. They knew ownership was questionable. They built anyway. Rel stood, face red, started to protest. The judge slammed her gavel. Miss Peaton, you are not recognized to speak. Sit down or I'll have you removed. In the gallery, HOA members muttered. One man shouted, you told us this was legal. Security closed in. 5 minutes to settle, everyone. Callahan brought Rel up to the stand, question after question about the email, about who authorized the dock's destruction, about whether she checked any records before building. She dodged, claimed she trusted her professionals, claimed the county approved everything, couldn't remember who called for my dock to be removed. It didn't matter. She looked done. Judge Fairchild took her time reviewing notes while the room held its breath. Then she looked up. Based on the authenticated 77 survey, the tax records, the chain of title, and the lack of a licensed surveyor on the 2018 plat map I find for Mr. Donovan. He is the lawful owner of the 12 acres, including the entire western shoreline of Clearwater Lake. The HOA's construction constitutes trespass and must be remedied. She ordered the HOA to remove all structures from my land within 90 days, awarded me $750,000 in damages, ordered the HOA to publish a formal apology in the paper. The courtroom exploded, half the HOA screaming, half in shock, the judge banging her gavel, security threatening to clear the room. I just sat there feeling all the months of anger and doubt melting into a kind of numb relief. Callahan leaned over, grinning, and whispered, "We won." Completely. Outside reporters crowded the courthouse steps. Relly resigned as president within a week, citing health concerns. The board appointed a retired credit manager as interim. First thing he did, release the HOA's financials. They were a train wreck, over $4 million sunk into the cabins, all borrowed against future dues. Now every member owed another $15,000 to cover my judgment and demolition costs. 40% of the houses went up for sale within a month. And it just got messier. It's a funny thing how fast the walls come down once the truth cracks the first brick. The week after the judgment, Ridgewood Meadows went from smug, tight-lipped suburbia to full-on crisis mode. Michelle Rell quietly packed up, put her place on the market, and slipped out of town. Her resignation letter blamed health and family, but everyone knew she was running from the fallout. The board was in shambles, holding emergency meetings nearly every night, their new interim president sweating through shirts as he tried to explain where all the money went. Spoiler, most of it was gone, spent, or promised to contractors who suddenly stopped picking up their phones. Then the EPA showed up. I don't know who tipped them off. Maybe some angry HOA member who'd just found out they'd have to pony up $20,000 more for remediation. But by March, there were government SUVs parked by the lake, men and women in khakis and windbreakers, tromping around with clipboards, snapping photos. Turns out all those luxury cabins had been built with septic systems and runoff drainage that didn't come close to meeting federal guidelines. 25 cabins built within 100 feet of the water without Clean Water Act permits. That's a big no-no. The fines were astronomical, $500,000 just to start, and they hadn't even gotten to the restoration plan yet. Meanwhile, the county recorder's office, which had waved through the HOA's plat map without checking for a real surveyor's stamp, got roasted by the local newspaper. How did a $4 million project get approved on someone else's land? The headline blared. Turns out the guy running the place was 12 years into a job he'd gotten through a cousin on the county commission, didn't know the difference between an engineer and a land surveyor, or just didn't care. State legislature started poking around past new rules about who could approve plat maps and who had to check every boundary dispute from the last 30 years. The old county recorder quietly announced he wouldn't seek re-election. You'd think that'd be enough to quiet folks down, but you'd be wrong. Some people, maybe 20, maybe 30, never forgave me for wrecking their dream. I started getting more anonymous notes in the mailbox. "You'll never be welcome here. Hope you're happy, old man." They organized a protest outside the courthouse one Saturday. "Stop the land grab," the sign said. Never mind that they were the ones who grabbed my land. Irony's lost on people when their wallets are on fire. But then something shifted. A couple of the newer HOA members' folks who hadn't lived here long showed up at my door one afternoon in late March. The woman was a school counselor, nervous, wringing her hands, 2 kids in the car out front. She apologized, said she'd believed what Relly told her, thought the HOA was fighting some greedy recluse. "I'm sorry," she said, eyes brimming. "I thought it was about protecting the community. I never asked any questions." I made us tea, listened as she poured it all out. She asked if maybe if the HOA bought the land properly this time, could the cabins stay? I told her the answer was still no. Not for sale. Not now. Not ever. She nodded, wiped her eyes, and left. Most folks never said anything, just glared or turned away in the store. But a few, they tried to make it right. The county and the state made a show of fixing the loopholes that had let all this happen, hired more people for the recorder's office, started using real surveyors for every new development. Montana Public Radio did a whole segment on it, how rural land was being gobbled up by out-of-town developers, and how easy it was for a bad plat map to ruin families and communities for generations. One reporter asked me what I'd do with the land now that I'd won. I said honestly I hadn't figured it out yet. But one thing was clear, there wasn't going to be a quick fix. By May, the demolition crews arrived, same heavy equipment that built those cabins, now tearing them down pile by pile. 3 weeks of trucks and backhoes, the whole western shore turned into mud and tire ruts. They tried to save some of the wood, but most of it was too splintered. Nearly all of it ended up in the landfill. EPA mandated a full restoration, native grasses, willows, even brought in ecologists to monitor the water. I stood there watching day after day, not feeling much of anything, just tired, just glad it was almost over. By June, the land started looking familiar again, bare but clean. Green shoots pushing up through the old gravel. The EPA guy came out, took samples, signed off. I hired a local carpenter, a man who'd worked with my grandfather back in the 80s to rebuild the dock. We used cedar this time, made it bigger, stronger. He showed me joinery tricks Pop had taught him, a kind of passing down, you know. When we finished, we carved the same words into the beam. Donovan Landing Est, 1978, rebuilt 2025. Then underneath I added a new line, for those who respect the land. The old carpenter smiled, ran his hand over the lettering, refused half his pay. Consider it payback for what you've been through, he said. That August, Fletcher Grayson, the old surveyor came out with a nurse from the retirement home. We sat on the new dock feet, dangling above the water, and I told him what I was planning. Truth was, I couldn't just leave this land empty, not after everything. I'm thinking about turning it into a conservation resort, I told him. Just a few rooms in a small lodge, the rest kept wild. People can come learn about the lake study, the ecosystem hike and kayak. But no more cabins, no more subdivisions. And nobody gets in unless they understand what stewardship really means. He nodded, smiling. Your grandfather would be proud, son. That's the way. I met with Callahan and got him to help me form an LLC, wrote up operating agreements, drafted guest rules. Only invitees, educational groups, researchers, and families who respected the place could visit. And clear as daylight, I put it in writing. Anyone involved in the HOA's land grab or harassment campaign was permanently banned. Not revenge, just setting boundaries. Just making sure the lesson stuck. Construction on the lodge started in September. We kept it small, 6 rooms, all with views of the lake. Solar panels, gray water, composting, toilets. Kitchen big enough for a group of 12, fireplace with shelves of old books, stone path leading down to the water. Every part designed to fit the land, not fight it. The first guest was that school counselor, the one who apologized. She brought her daughter, stayed 3 days. Spent hours on the dock kayaking, watching birds. She left a note in the guest book. Thank you for showing my family what stewardship really means. More guests came, some I knew, some from word of mouth. I turned away twice as many as I accepted. Hired a few locals who'd lost jobs after the HOA's collapse, put them to work on repairs, hospitality, trail maintenance. We partnered with the local schools' field trips for kids learning about water systems and ecology. Never made much money, barely broke even most months. But that wasn't the point, was it? The point was to protect what mattered. November. A year after the courthouse, I sat on that dock with coffee, watched the sun come up over water smooth as glass. The western shore was wild again, healed mostly if you didn't look too close. The HOA was gone, the county smarter, my family's land safe again. I thought about my grandfather, how he'd bought this place when nobody else saw the value, and how close I came to losing it just because I believed the world played fair. What I learned is this ownership isn't something you write down once and forget. It's a fight every generation. And sometimes you win, not by being the loudest, but by being the most stubborn, the most prepared, the last one standing. Sometimes justice is slow and quiet and doesn't feel much like victory at all. Sometimes it's just a tired man with splinters in his hands watching the sunrise on water his grandfather once called home. The guests would be waking soon, wanting to know the story, maybe even understand why some land is worth fighting for. And I'd tell them not to brag, but to remind them, justice, real justice, is just being allowed to do what's right. Sometimes that's enough. Morning came soft over Clearwater Lake, almost like it had forgotten the chaos of the last year. I sat on the dock with my coffee steam curling in the cold air, listening to the loon call across the water. Every reflection on the glassy surface reminded me of the journey that had brought me here: tense hearings, endless documentation, lawyers with serious eyebrows, and nights lying awake wondering if I'd lose everything my grandfather, my father, and I had worked for. The lodge was quiet now. A retired couple from Billings were my first long-term guests that day, already exploring the trails, asking questions about the lake ecosystem. Everything about the property felt alive again, green, vibrant, untouched by greed or carelessness. The scars of those 25 cabins were still there. If you knew where to look, slight depressions in the earth, patches of grass growing unevenly, but give it a year, maybe two, and even those would fade. Fletcher came up again in August, smiling despite his age, his hands shaky but his mind sharp. We sat together on the dock, feet dangling over the water, and I told him the full plan: small lodge, limited guests, wilderness preserved, education prioritized. He nodded. "Your grandfather didn't buy this land to lock it away," he said. "He bought it to protect it. What you're doing, that's smart stewardship. That's respect. That's the legacy he wanted to continue." I worked with Callahan to form the LLC, drafted operating agreements, and established rules for the resort guests by invitation or reservation, only priority to educational groups, researchers, and families who showed respect for the land. Anyone who participated in the HOA's trespass or harassment campaign, permanently banned. No exceptions. Not revenge, just standards, and a way to make sure no one ever made the same mistake again. Construction on the lodge began in September. We worked with reclaimed timber, energy-efficient systems, positioning the building to blend with the landscape, not dominate it. 6 rooms each with a view of the lake, a common area with fireplace and bookshelves, a kitchen for communal meals, solar panels, gray water systems, and composting toilets exceeding EPA standards. We did it right, or as right as we could. The first guests were people who understood the lessons of respect and stewardship. They left with smiles, thank you notes, sometimes even laughter spilling down to the dock. And every day I kept vigil over the land. Walked the shoreline, inspected the plantings, made sure the lake and forest were left alone. It was work, yes, but work I didn't mind. Not anymore. By that November, almost exactly a year after the courthouse battle, I sat on the dock again, coffee warming my hands. The western shore was wild, alive, and finally quiet. REL and the HOA were gone. County regulations had improved, legal oversight tightened. My family's land was secure. And most importantly, the legacy of my grandfather, the stewardship of my father, and now my commitment, all of it was alive and well. I thought about those who had tried to steal it. Some apologized like that counselor early on, but most didn't. Some organized protests, angry messages online, but I never responded. Let them be mad. I'd already learned that justice doesn't announce itself with fireworks or headlines. Real justice is quiet, patient, relentless. It's the slow correction of wrongs through law, evidence, and truth. And in the end, it doesn't matter what others think. It's about what you do with what you've inherited, what you protect, and how you honor it. I brewed another cup of coffee, watching the sunrise paint the lake orange and gold. Somewhere across the water, the loon called again, carrying its voice across the distance, clear, wild, untamed. I raised my cup in silent toast to the land, to the family that came before me, and to the work of keeping what matters safe for the generations to come. because that's what this was always about: stewardship, legacy, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that what you love is still there, preserved and respected, not because the world demands it, but because you insisted it be so. Sometimes justice is loud. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's just being allowed to do what's right. And sometimes that is enough. I lean back, listening to the gentle lap of water on cedar boards, thinking about my grandfather, my father, and the small, stubborn ways we leave our mark on this world. And I knew without a doubt that the land would last, because this time it wasn't just mine. It was ours, protected and respected for the long haul. The lodge would welcome guests, the trails would see footsteps of students and families, and the lake would keep its quiet magic. And as for the cabins that had dared to rise on my grandfather's land, gone. Just a memory, a cautionary tale, a testament to patience, perseverance, and the undeniable power of truth. And that, folks, is how you protect a legacy.